I'll never forget the first night I realized my own neighbors were trying to turn my home into a prison. It wasn't the kind of paranoia you read about on internet forums, and it wasn't some little spat over mailbox paint or lawn height. No, this was different. This was war disguised as neighborhood policy. I'd been living on my father's land in Oklahoma all my life, nearly 40 acres of rolling pasture and a house that had stood through tornadoes, droughts, and storms that cracked barns in half. It was more than property. It was memory, blood, and work hammered into every fence post. My father used to say, "This place survives because we survive." And those words had carried me through every hardship. So when the developers moved in 5 years ago, carving up land on the west side of my property into neat little subdivisions with plastic fences and ornamental mailboxes, I figured I'd stay out of their way. They called it Oak Ridge Estates and elected themselves a homeowners association within the year. At first it was laughable. People paying monthly dues for rules about lawn ornaments, while I was still out here fixing tractors and maintaining a well system deep enough to outlast the county line. They weren't supposed to bother me. I wasn't a member. My land predates their bylaws by 50 years. But trouble always finds its way when people think power makes them untouchable. It started small. Letters stuffed in my mailbox asking if I'd consider joining the community effort by selling a portion of my property for better access roads. I burned the first 2 without a thought. Then came the third, offering me $800,000 and promising it was fair market value. I laughed so hard my dog Baxter lifted his head from the porch and gave me a side eye. You don't sell history for a check. You don't bury your father's legacy under someone else's cookie-cutter dream. After I refused, things shifted. A strange car started parking across from my drive at odd hours. Men with clipboards walked my fence line pretending to be county surveyors. One evening I caught them shifting my property flags a few feet inward. I confronted them, and they scurried off without a word. That's when I knew it wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was a plan. And the face of that plan revealed herself soon after. Amanda Lewis, the HOA President, rolled up one Saturday morning in a spotless SUV that looked like it had never touched gravel. She stepped out in a navy skirt suit, heels clicking on the dirt like she was walking into a boardroom instead of someone's front yard. "Mr. Harlan," she said with that fake cheerfulness that makes your skin crawl, "I think you've been misunderstanding our intentions." She talked about community growth, about harmony and safety, about how progress can't wait for nostalgia. I told her plainly that I wasn't interested. My land was not for sale, not for lease, not for negotiation. She placed a business card on my fence post like she was planting a flag on conquered soil and said, "You'll change your mind. They all do." The way her eyes flickered as she smiled told me she meant it. Weeks later, I woke up to the sound of machinery grinding against rock. I stepped outside and saw the first trench being carved along my eastern fence. Dust clouds hung in the air, diesel engines roared, and there she was in a reflective vest, waving at me like this was a parade instead of a siege. I yelled across the fence, demanding an explanation. She smiled like it was all a misunderstanding. "Just drainage work, Mr. Harlan. County approved." But my gut told me different. By the end of the week, 3 sides of my property were carved with trenches, each wide enough to trap a truck tire. By the time I called the sheriff, they'd blocked my only driveway with a dump truck. The deputy shrugged, said disputes like this went through zoning, and Amanda stood behind him smirking like the verdict had already been written. They thought they could choke me out, starve me of access, and I'd eventually give up. But what they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for storms like this my entire life. Years ago, after a rash of break-ins in the county, I'd installed hidden trail cameras all around my property. They were tucked into fence posts, disguised as birdhouses, even hidden in a busted feed barrel. They weren't just for thieves. They fed into a cloud system through a repeater buried under my shed. That footage became my lifeline. I watched as workers moved my property stakes. I caught them laughing about how I'd be gone by summer. And the most damning of all, I recorded Amanda herself, pointing toward my well and telling a contractor, "Get close enough to that pump and he won't last a month." Hearing her say it made my blood run cold. I gathered every second of footage and drove it straight to the sheriff's office. At first, they treated me like I was overreacting. But when I showed Amanda's recorded words, the senior deputy's expression changed. "This is bigger than zoning," he muttered. He filed a report, but I knew paperwork in this county moved slower than winter molasses, so I went public. Screenshots hit the Oak Ridge community Facebook page that night. Within hours, neighbors who had stayed silent began asking questions. The full video went on YouTube the next day, and it spread faster than prairie fire in dry wind. Amanda tried to spin it as a smear campaign. She sent me a cease and desist letter. I laughed and told her lawyer, "I've got more footage than Netflix." By then, reporters were calling, news vans circling, and county officials couldn't ignore it any longer. That's when Amanda escalated. She ordered her crew to fence off my well entirely, posting laminated, restricted zone signs like she had government authority. They even came at night with concrete blocks to wall off the last opening I'd left for supply runs. And she was there too, standing in the shadows, arms crossed like some mob boss giving silent approval. That was the night I decided enough was enough. I slung my rifle across my shoulder and stepped into the yard. I didn't raise it, didn't point it, but I let the weight of it speak. "Evening, gentlemen," I said evenly. "This is private property. What you're doing is criminal trespass. Oklahoma law gives me the right to defend my home. Lay one more block, and you'll regret it." One of the workers set the concrete down like it was live dynamite. Amanda's voice cracked as she shouted, "You're threatening us with a weapon!" But I already had my phone recording. "No, ma'am," I said loud enough for the mic. "I'm stating the law. You've cut my driveway, dug trenches around me, blocked my water, and now you're trying to wall me in at night. And I've got it all on camera." By the time the deputies arrived, I was back on my porch, rifle locked away. They watched the footage, shook their heads, and one muttered, "All right, this changes things." The courtroom smelled of old wood and iron, the kind of place where truth weighed heavier than appearances. Amanda swept in like she owned the building, lawyers at her side, designer bag in hand, that same smug smile plastered across her face. She thought this was just another meeting where she could talk louder, wave papers, and win. But judges don't bend to HOA threats. My lawyer, Dana, walked in with nothing flashy, just binders full of evidence. When the judge asked for opening statements, Amanda's lawyer launched into a speech about community rights and non-compliant landowners. Dana didn't waste breath. She simply handed over a stack of documents and pressed play on a recording. Amanda's own voice filled the room, cold and sharp. "If we cut his water off, he'll fold." The sound echoed like a hammer strike. The judge raised his eyebrows. Amanda's confident smile twitched. Then Dana revealed the permits Amanda had been waving at deputies. They weren't just outdated, they were forged, signed by an official who'd been dead 3 years. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Amanda's lawyers stammered, tried to spin it as a clerical mix-up, but the judge leaned forward, his voice heavy. "Fraudulent documents. Tampering with property. Ms. Lewis, this is not a misunderstanding. This is criminal." And just like that, her empire cracked. The ruling was swift. Cease and desist. Restore the land, unblock the well, refill every trench. The county would be pressing charges for fraud and conspiracy. Amanda froze in her chair, her mask finally slipping. Within a week, county trucks rolled in, pouring gravel, smoothing driveways, and tearing out the last of her barricades. My land breathed again. Neighbors watched in silence, some ashamed they'd ever supported her. Amanda. She was too busy making bail. Her mugshot splashed across local news with the headline, "HOA President Charged in Property Scheme." By month's end, the Oak Ridge HOA collapsed entirely. Bank accounts frozen, members resigning, the subdivision left without a leader. People finally realized they didn't need one. Standing on my porch with Baxter at my feet, I watched freedom return to the ridge. I built a tall cedar fence, hung a steel plate on it that read, "Siege of 2025, never again." To me, it wasn't just a victory. It was proof that bullies fall hardest when they think they're untouchable. Amanda thought she was the law. The court reminded her she wasn't above it.